Welcome to Inspirational Transformational TV show. Amy Whitney here today with my very special guest, Wolf Starchild. Wolf walked barefoot 1,000 kilometers along the Bruce Trail. During that time, he discovered the importance of being still, being silent, being in the moment. And with that knowledge, he's still creating the most incredible life. Wolf works with children, he's a video producer, he works with the natural environment, he leads hikes, he has such an incredible respect, resonance, love for the natural environment that if you don't want to lick a tree when this interview is done, then you haven't quite got his point. Enjoy the show today. Wolf Starchild, welcome to Inspirational Transformational TV show. Thanks so much for joining me today.
No problem, I'm happy to be here.
Now, you are an adventurer, a travel writer, an outdoor educator, but you have not always worn those titles, if I can say that. You found yourself at a certain point in life where you knew things had to change. Do you mind taking us back to that point and running the story from there?
Sure, absolutely. In the mid-2000s, I found myself working in a call center, which many people do in my area, and I thought I really wanted to change. I wanted something new, something exciting. I wanted to make some changes to my life, and I wasn't 100% sure where. So I decided in 2008, that I was going to hike the Bruce Trail, which is Canada's oldest and longest footpath. It runs about 1,000 kilometers, give or take, from Queenston, Ontario, all the way up to Tobermory, Ontario. So it took me an entire year of planning, getting in shape, running, jogging, cycling, everything in between, choosing equipment, learning any skills or techniques that I would need to do the trip. Then in June 1st, 2006, I set on my way up the trail. And it was just myself and my dog. And so I got a couple of months leave from work, and off I went. And it was a completely mind-bending, life-changing experience.
Prior to deciding to do that walk, was that a passion of yours? Were you a hiker or?
Absolutely,
yeah,
yes.
Okay.
I've always been an outdoors person.
Okay.
Prior to this, I was a transport truck driver, and the only reason I got into driving truck was to travel. Basically, I was paid to take my truck, which I owned, and I could travel anywhere in North America. So I found myself being chased by tornadoes and breaking down in the middle of the deserts, and spending New Year's Eve on the beach in someplace in Texas, or things like that. So from there, my desire and passion for travel in the outdoors just sort of started to grow and grow and grow. I had to leave trucking just because it was starting to be a bit too much, driving 18, 19 hours a day, and then sleeping, and then not being home for 3 weeks. So you always miss that call of the wild, so to speak. So that's where the origins of this trip came from.
Okay, so prior to going on the trail, did you have a preconceived idea of what would happen to you? I'm assuming there was a lot of realizations, epiphanies, I suppose, when you're alone for that long walking?
Absolutely, yeah. It was basically, I had broken it down. I went to school to learn some outdoor skills, outdoor training. I worked for Brock University as a hike leader there for a couple of years beforehand. And so I had learned how to plan this sort of thing, because it's a big undertaking, right? I'm going to be hundreds of kilometers away from home. There's probably not going to be any mobile coverage. I bought something called a spot satellite unit to track my progress, so I could send messages so people would know where I was. Going through the equipment, and then it's like, wow, that very first day, you're standing there, and I was standing there, the car dropped me off, and I'm looking at this cairn going, wow, ahead of me is 1,000 kilometers of travel, and I had no real expectations other than to put one foot in front of the other and to head out on it. But while I was doing it, a friend of mine said, who was a polar explorer, he went to Antarctica, and he said, I noticed in all your photos that you never wear shoes. I said, well, It's just sort of who I am. It helps me with a spiritual connection with the earth. It helps bind me to reality, so to speak. And he said, you need to tell some people about this because I bet it's going to really turn some heads. So I started writing about it on the internet and things like that. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I get people from magazines and newspapers and television shows all sending me emails. While I was in the southern section, I had phone and internet access. And it was like, wow, this is kind of neat. So, I would meet reporters on the trail, and they'd film me and take pictures of me. And it was like, I could get used to this. I like being in the outdoors. It's kind of neat being in the spotlight a little tiny bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of fun that way.
So you've always gone barefoot.
That's right. Yes.
And you mentioned there's a connection. Do you think that because I've heard that the invention of shoes or people wearing shoes has led to health issues, has led to a lot of other issues. Do you run along those lines?
Oh, absolutely, I do. I'm one of those people that I've sort of, you look at humanity and we say that humans have been around for about 1 million years on the earth. The oldest shoes that we have found through history only go back about 5,000 years. So what did we do before then? Everybody was okay. And it's only been those last few thousand years that it's become more and more of a thing that, especially here in the West, that people do. And they say that right now, approximately 70% of the planet doesn't wear shoes to begin with because of, geographical or economical reasons. And they all manage okay.
Currently 70%.
That's right. Places like, when you consider populations of places like India and Africa and things like that.
So apart from Canadian winter, for instance, would you say that the shoe was brought in just as a money-making idea?
I don't know. Originally, it was brought in for protection. They were developed by the Roman army, and it was that when soldiers went into combat, it gave them a combative edge to protect them from bones and things like that. Okay. And it just sort of evolved from there into a status symbol of only the rich and the wealthy could wear shoes, and that's where high heels had come from, as a wealth and a status symbol. Right. And I think since we've evolved from a nature-based society, and about the last 20 years we have gone to a safety-based society where children aren't allowed to climb trees, they're not allowed to do anything that's terribly fun or exciting like when I was young. When I was growing up, my mom would close the door on me in the morning and say, don't come back till 6 o'clock, till dark. Go out and do your thing, and now that's totally unheard of. And I think that is, as seeing going without shoes as something, as an unsafe act, is sort of taken hold in society. But I'm breaking through that barrier.
Have you changed anyone else's opinion? Have you noticed that those of your peer groups, people around you, incorporating the no shoe type thing? I
have a lot of people that try it. That are like, oh, if you can do it, it can't be that hard. I can do it. I've done it for so long that I'm really, really used to it. So, going on stones and stuff, because I'm outside all the time, it doesn't really mean anything to me. But I've had other people that I've been with, and they're like, ooh, that's hard. It's just, I guess, conditioning, like anything else.
Okay, so take us back to the trail. Do you have any stories that stand out, or any experiences that were particularly moving, or highlights of that actual trek?
Oh, absolutely. It's really hard when you do a trip for 4 months straight to try to pick out some of the best things, because every day was incredible. I mean, every day I would wake up in the woods with my dog. I'd pack up my tent and put one foot in front of the other and just travel. And I remember standing in Queenston, Ontario, and I would look out over Lake Ontario at the south side. So I was at the southernmost shore of Lake Ontario, and I could see Toronto. And I can remember one day looking out and being that exact same distance from Toronto, but on the other side of Toronto, thinking, I'm really moving.
That's classic.
And then I can remember one day hiking along and looking out and seeing another south shore. And I thought, well, that's obviously not Lake Ontario. So I pulled out my map book, and it's like, that's Georgian Bay. And then that was about the time, within a day or so, that somebody was coming to pick me up and deliver me supplies and stuff. And I said, they said it was like a 3-hour car drive, and you've been out, took me 3 hours to drive by car on the highway, and you've been taking these meandering trails for like a month. And it was like, wow, the distance that I traveled was amazing. And nature in itself, what I saw, was just spectacular.
Did you feel a shift with your resonance when you were in nature? becoming more peaceful, more in tune with nature? Like you would hear
Absolutely.
things better? Yeah.
Absolutely. I try to try to relax and take my time. When my first couple of weeks on the trail, my view was to get the trail done. That was what my focus was, to get from here to Tobermory in one piece, and that was it. And I basically trucked on through. But as time goes on, and you kind of realize the scope of what I decided I wanted to do, I started to slow down and slow down. And then it was by about the midpoint, it was like, I'm out here to enjoy myself. I will probably never do this again. I may go somewhere else in the world and not have ever access to this trail. I want to enjoy. And as soon as I slowed down, it seemed like the world changed. It was like I noticed more birds. And I would start to hear bird calls and say, I wonder what kind of bird that is, and sort of start to sit and look around and say, wow, there's that bird. And then I would recognize what the kind of bird it was, a chickadee or a cardinal or whatever. And then it would be even the same with trees and rocks and things like that. And it was kind of neat. What I did find was challenging was anytime that humans were involved in the trail, it made it challenging. Because they would take the trail off where the trail was, and it would run across like a dirt road. And dirt roads were exotically difficult to navigate without your shoes on, with big stones and things like that. Yeah.
And when you returned, like when you left after 4 months and left your nature surroundings and returned to the city, or returned to, I guess I'll call it civilization, was that a bit startling to your senses?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was. The one thing I noticed, that it was noisy and it really smelled compared to what I was used to. Having people around me, going to malls and stuff, it felt really strange. The wilderness was such a source of freedom for me. And I started thinking, people need to know about this. Like, I did this amazing trip that is basically right in the densest part of Canada, and no one knows it's there. Yes. Very, very few people I talk to are like, oh, I've heard of the Bruce Trail. Is that, is that in Canada? Is it Ontario? And it's like, wow, you don't know about this. That's amazing. So I took all my journals and things like that, and I started writing stories. And I started publishing these stories on an internet blog. I went to a little free website, and it was like, yeah, that's kind of neat. And then I'd look at my pictures, and I thought that's kind of interesting. And then I would get messages from staff of magazines. One of them was Our Canada magazine. Say, hey, I saw your story, and wow, I want to submit some stuff to us. So I thought, well, okay. So I started learning about travel writing, and they all said, oh, well, don't ever expect to get published as a travel writer. It's the hardest writing genre to get into. So I submitted stories, and they were getting published. And it was like, wow, that's neat. And then one day, Canadian Geographic was doing an article on barefoot hiking, and they found me, and they're like, hey, we need to talk to you. And I was like, wow, it's all starting to come together. So I decided it was at that point that the world needs to learn a little bit more about what's in their own backyard.
Yes.
And as I was talking to a lot of these reporters, they would all say the same thing. They'd say, the money for you is going to be in television, it's going to be in teaching, it's going to be in the outdoors. So I just sort of started to take a much deeper interest in learning about the outdoors, learning more survival skills, learning to find out where there's hiking clubs who need hikes to be led, and things like that. And it just sort of meandered left and right a little bit. And then I was fortunate at my job that I got laid off. Now, I know a lot of people won't say that's fortunate, but for me it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I got laid off, and I decided to start a guiding company, so I did that for a little while. Unfortunately, Niagara area wasn't as successful or as lucrative as I'd hoped. And then I had the opportunity to go back to school through a Canadian program called Second Career, where they basically pay for me to go back to school as a condition of our unemployment insurance. So I said, well, that's a great opportunity. I want to do stuff for the outdoors.
Yes.
So the program that I was able to take is called Recreation and Leisure, which is just that. I worked with the staff using my previous credentials of being published and everything else to help customize the program for me. So it's geared to the outdoors, and that's sort of where I'm going. Beautiful. So I ended up buying a video camera, and I'm making videos and things like that. So when the videos hit YouTube, which are approximately once every week, I'm now getting network television shows saying, wow, you really have it together. Why don't we see what we can do? We got to talk. The most fascinating part about it is that I will get celebrities who I idolize like people like Les Stroud, Cody Lundeen from the United States, and they will email me and say, hey, I saw your latest video. I think that's kind of neat. So I decided that since that was the path I wanted to go with my life, what I was going to do is model after them. So I studied them, as much information as I can. I learned where they came from, how they got to where they were, what kind of camera equipment they use, and everything like that. Watched all their TV shows and sort of self-mentored myself with them. And it's slowly lurching forward. I'm pretty excited about that.
Beautiful. So the walk transformed your path, or you were already on the path of transformation before you went on?
No, I think the walk transformed it. It was at the point where, I would look out at this beauty and say, no one knows it's here, and the world needs to know about how beautiful some of the most basic things are in your own backyard that people don't even know that exist. And that's when that's what transformed me. And I said, I can't go back to the office now that I've experienced this beautiful freedom. Yes. And it was very rare that it was anything other than freedom. I admit that I went for several months where it rained day in and day out. That was pretty challenging, but it was still better than going back to civilization and things like that. And yeah, writing in my journal, I can remember one night we had the worst storm in decades, and I think it was the tail end of a hurricane, and it had passed through Hamilton area. That's where I was early in the trail. And it was like bright lights so strong that it lit up the inside of my tent like daylight. And it was like, wow, what am I doing here? My dog needed to go out, so I unzipped the tent and she ran out, and I thought, I really don't want to chase you half naked through the woods. Please come back. She came back, and I could see that it was like brighter than daylight outside. And it was like, wow, that was the only time on the trail that I was ever to the point where I was almost scared. Yes. But it was also transformational in that it was that connection that I felt with the world at that point. It was just amazing. That's beautiful. And it was like, wow, there's so many people that go through their whole lives, they never experience this, and they need, maybe through me I can help people see what's out there.
I don't know if you'll feel like you can answer this, but I've read that mental illness, depression, things like that, they're on the rise. But then when I hear you describe being connected to the earth the way you were, would you think that possibly things like depression, insomnia, would be on the rise because people are disconnected? Is that a fair question to ask you?
Absolutely. Just going to adjust here. There we go. Absolutely, that's a fair question. Since I have been come back to civilization, and I've had to stay because of school, I've taken a keen interest in what's called nature deficit disorder. And that's a disorder where there's a few people in the community, influential individuals, who have gotten together and said there is a correlation between, it's a hypothesis, that there's a rise in things like asthma attacks, depression, mental illness, autism, all that sort of stuff, that seemed to come about at the specific point where we said we don't need to be outside. Children aren't allowed to be dirty. Children aren't allowed to go without their shoes. They're not allowed to. We want to do our best so they don't go and get all banged up and things. And please, I'm not saying that I'm into allowing children to get injured, but children should have the right to go out and play. And being, battered about by nature is just sort of growing up, really. And so they've noticed this correlation, and they came up with a concept called nature deficit disorder. And I completely buy into this, and as part of my job for the organization I work for, is to teach children that it's okay to be dirty. It's okay to get the dirt on your face and the mud under your nails. And we're finding with this that it makes your immune system work harder, because if you're too clean, your immune system just puts its hands, I can relax, it's okay, right? So then when you're exposed to all this stuff, these things happen. So we're finding that when we do studies in other countries of children that are allowed to go out, and they are like we used to be, where you were growing up and your mom would lock you out and say, "Don't come back, go get dirty, go to the creek and spend hours down there learning, watching water spiders and try to catch them and all that." That those children are healthier. They're finding that when they grow up and they're not constantly forced to wear shoes, that they don't have back problems, they don't have knee problems, hip problems, and it all sort of aligns up. So I think there's definitely something to be said that here in our Western culture, that we are definitely missing the outdoor component to our lives.
And do you have procedure or a mission or a pathway that that you plan to reintroduce it to the Western world?
Sure, absolutely. Through my film is how I find it. I was promoting a television series called In Your Own Backyard, and that was based on the Get to Know program, which is a program spearheaded by Les Stroud and Robert Bateman, where they said you need to get to know your neighborhood. And we went out and I did some film footage of saying, look what's just in the Niagara region. We have like 70 waterfalls here. Most of them are very small, but some of them are like Balls Falls or significant falls. You know, they're hidden all over the place in these little patches of nature that time has forgotten. So I take myself and I take my cameras out there and I say, look at this. You know, I go all to these places, and my whole point of this is not to say that I can do it and anybody else can't, but that anybody can go to these places and to see what's out there and to just admire the beauty that nature has to offer. There's just something kind of tribal and primal and mystical about being near a waterfall, and it touches a part of your soul that unless you're there and you can feel that the water spray and you can hear that rumble and that roar, it's hard to describe. It really is.
That's beautiful. And you're now currently working with children. Do you see a difference, say, when a child first goes into your can I call it a camp that
yes,
you run?
It's a camp.
When they first enter to, you know, by the time when they leave the camp, do you see a freeing of a child?
Yes, I do. Absolutely. I see they, for some things, I have to admit, I'm very strict when it comes to, like, archery, for example, because there's safety concerns. I don't want anybody getting shot.
Yes.
But I try to have the kids just loosen up and relax. And I can give you a perfect example. We were doing this game called Tree Agent, where you go to a tree and you look at the tree and you examine the tree, and then you say, what would this be perfect for? Whether it be an owl or a porcupine or a raccoon or any mythical creature that they wanted to make up. So I said, okay, you must be the tree. So I had all the children, then we went as a group and we said, okay, sell me your tree, tell me what. And they said, well, this is good for an owl and this and that. And I said, well, did you try the tree? Did you lick the tree? And they're like, lick? I said, no, lick the tree. And they're, you first. So I put my hands on the tree and I licked the bark, and everybody was like, oh, that's so cool. I didn't know. And I said, oh, look it was a pine tree. Look at the sap. You know, and they were like, well, how does it taste? I said, well, why don't you try it? It was horrible. I admit it was awful. But it was like, you try it. And then, you know, the kids just loved it. And they had this connection and this freedom that doing these things is okay. The next day I get hauled into a private meeting with my boss. And they said, we have some information that you've been allowing children to lick trees. Yes. Yes, I have. And they said, I don't know much about the outdoors. Is that safe? It's perfectly safe. Are you sure? Absolutely sure.
That is gorgeous.
And I'm like, okay, you know, and it was kind of funny to see that the people who are running this outdoor facility, they should know that that's, you know, granted is not a 100% safe activity, but it's not, you know, they're not going to catch some strange disease as long as they're not licking moss or anything. And it was just that kind of connection, you know.
Beautiful.
And so then at the very end of the day, we have what we call closing circle. So we have all the campers sitting around, and everybody was like, oh, Wolf needs to lick the tree, I'm not licking the tree. So the one counselor, a young lady, says, I'll lick the tree. So she goes, and she worked in a lot of outdoor facilities. She did the same thing. It's like, okay. So then the next thing I know, there's this large tree in the woods, and we have about 8 children and the 2 of us, and we're all licking the bark of the tree. And it's a really mystical experience. Like, all of a sudden, it's okay to do that.
That's
you know?
beautiful.
Yeah, it was fun.
And where to from here for you? You make films. You're a writer. You work with children, which is so beautiful. You lead hikes. Do you have an end goal, like an ultimate? My perfect life is this. Absolutely.
I would like to do more film. I would like to be in a position where my films are shown on television networks in different places around the world. And get to travel with that, because I found that's a passion. I love writing, and I really love writing. It was a passion too. For example, a couple of years ago, I took the opportunity to canoe out to a lighthouse that was 2 kilometers off the coast of Lake Erie. I would never recommend anybody who views this to try that feat, to do it by canoe. It was very dangerous. People die doing that. But I thought, you know what? I'm just going to let the spirit guide me, and I'm sure I'll be okay. So I got out there. I took all the photographs. I wrote an amazing story, It got published in Our Canada magazine. And yeah, I canoed back, and I love that so much, and I want to go back now with camera and do video. I found video is my passion. I enjoy teaching. That's also something else, but I find maybe I can mend the two.
Yes.
I can do educational style videos and make them fun and exciting, and people will say, I want to go there.
That's really beautiful.
And I guess some of it is based on when you look at Canada, we're a vast country. We're one of the largest countries on the planet. There's so much diversity here. But when you watch television, all the TV shows are made in India, they're made in Africa, they're made in all these far off places, but we have all of that right here. You don't need a passport. All you need is sometimes you don't even need a car. You can take a bus, train, and I think I really want to kind of focus on that, to show people that you don't have to go halfway around the world to find adventure. You can find it right in your own backyard.
Oh, you're making me so excited. I want to get out there right now. It's really awesome to be in your energy. Now, I don't know if you'll want to discuss this, but I'm going to throw it out there because you mentioned it a few times. You've talked about being guided by spirit. Is that something that came from being in nature, your connection with the spirit world, or how would you describe?
I would say yes, absolutely. Yeah. Growing up, I grew up in a family that had asked me to be Christian. I wouldn't say it was a Christian family by any means. And it just, I went as deep as I could into Christian philosophy. I was an altar boy and everything. And I would sit and I would say, I don't understand why, if there's a divine being, why we're indoors, why are we why are we inside when it's this, the church, and I admit churches are beautiful, and I have been to many of them around the world, and there's a certain calmness that you come, especially if you get into churches that are hundreds and hundreds of years old, and they are truly beautiful. But when you go outside, there's something else, there's something more real about it. And so when I started to become a teenager, I decided to leave Christianity and explore something more natural, which led me down a pagan path. And I was like, wow, gods of nature, I can relate to that. I can understand that. It makes sense to me, that we shouldn't, for me personally, it was like, I shouldn't have to go to a building to worship when the trees and the forest is my building. Yeah. And it sort of gained some popularity for a while, and I was really, really into Wiccan mythology, and I cast circle all the time, and through life things get busy because it's very, very time consuming to go out there. But yeah, so I think my view of spirituality and divinity is definitely nature based, and I think they're one and the same. And I see it everywhere you go, from, like, you look at a chickadee, and they have a beautiful little hee every time they're so happy. They're so small, but they're so loud that you can hear them for a kilometer. I mean, how does that happen? When you look at even the mystery of how a forest works, where, in the early spring you get certain species of trees and plants that they grow up, and then they go dormant because the next species comes in. And then the canopy grows, and then those species can't live anymore because the canopy's alive, and then the leaves fall off, and then it goes through this whole cycle. And I see that as a sign of divinity in itself. Like, the cycle's been happening for millions of years, and will probably happen as long as this planet stays the way it is. And we're just like a little... I always feel George Carlin said it best when he said that Earth can shake us off like a bad case of the fleas. We'll be long gone, all our buildings will be gone, but there's still going to be trees growing. They're still going to be moving around, things like that.
That's beautiful. And what's been your biggest inspiration?
Wow. I think the beauty of the world is an inspiration. I know that may sound kind of silly, but just going out there and seeing it and feeling it and experiencing all of these things that the world has to offer. There's on Discovery Channel, they have this song that they promote called "The World Is Just Awesome," and I relate so much with that. Because there's caves to explore, and there's so many different, there's mountains to climb, and there's seas to go scuba diving in, and I've done all of those things, and it never ceases to amaze me every time I go into a cave system, to think that I'm the first. Like, I'm one of the few humans that has ever seen this, and the last time natural light was in this area of the world was millions of years ago. And I always find that just remarkable. It really is.
That's beautiful. And your final words of wisdom today?
I think if you want to make changes to your life, that it's absolutely possible. You can be whatever you want to be. You just have to work at it the right way and just keep at it. And that's not giving up. Even though, right now I'm working like hours and hours and hours a week, so I don't get to write and film, but I'm still doing something I love. And as soon as this summer position ends, I'll be back to writing and filming. So you just have to keep at it, and it will happen eventually. It's not about the money, I think, is the big thing. It's about being happy. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
Wolf, thank you so much for this interview. It touched my heart. The connection that you have with your natural environment and the love that you have for it is palpable. It's so incredibly beautiful. The videos that you do, your educational website is vital. The information that you shared about nature deficit disorder, this needs to get out there, and I love the work you're doing with children. Everything you do, it flows from a place of love, and I appreciate it. I feel blessed to have met you, and I can't wait to keep watching your videos that you post. Much love and many blessings to you.